Sallee, CBS Sports National College Football writer and columnist, with us on Sikkim 365 Radio. Barrett, we've seen a lot these first few weeks. We've seen big-name programs struggling. We've seen Alabama taken to the limit by Florida. We know what's happening with Clemson, among some others, even Ohio State, Oklahoma. Is it, even though in the end, usually the blue bloods or the big boys end up in the end, is it kind of made for a more interesting start to the season?
Yeah, no doubt. There's no doubt. You kind of look around and everybody's kind of flawed, right? Like Georgia, you're not necessarily sure what their offense can do. We've seen glimpses, but then with Alabama, can they run the football? What's up with what happened against Florida? And Oklahoma obviously has its issues. Ohio State has a loss. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely is one of those years where all these contenders are flawed, and it's all about fixing whatever those flaws are as quickly as possible. We didn't really have that last year with Alabama. We really didn't have that last year or 2 years ago with LSU. So, yeah, it's different. There's no doubt. It is shaping up to be a year where, maybe 2014, where, kind of intrigue all over the place. And I think a lot of it has to do, two things. One, the quarterbacks for the top contenders generally are inexperienced. And then also you have a lot of super seniors across the country. And that experience certainly helps in situations like this because they've been in these hostile environments. Because I think you got to factor in, like DJ Uiagalelei, he had not been in a sold-out stadium until the first weekend of the season. Like, home or away, that's intimidating. So veterans, super seniors certainly play a bigger role this year than maybe they have in years past.
Have we gotten to the point, and it's not like it just started, but because of the playoff, and initially, of course, there's just been the 4, and who knows what might happen eventually with expansion of whether it goes to as many as 12, but is it almost to the point now that every game is almost overanalyzed? It's a great game. It's great that so many people care, but every single game, half, moment is a beauty pageant. Is that good?
Yeah, it's great. That's why we like the sport, because there's so much uncertainty with what the end of the season will look like. The college football championship format right now is designed to judge each season based on whatever the landscape of the season dictates. And so because of that, you have the passion, you have the uncertainty, you have, 2 weeks ago, Ohio State loses, the Big Ten has a bad week, and, they're never going to get a team in. Last week it's the ACC and the Pac-12. They're never going to get a team in. Those passionate responses and reactions, those are what make this sport great. And that's why this regular season is the best regular season in all sports, because you don't know what the end will bring. And I like that. And right now we're going to get a whole big dose of that, because there's going to be a lot of twists and turns as we go through the season.
Auburn obviously played well at Penn State, but it was a huge win, obviously, for Franklin. That last year was for a lot of teams. You don't throw it out, but obviously it was different for so many teams, and they struggled. How big a win was that, not just for Penn State, but also for the Big Ten?
Oh, huge. It was much needed for the Big Ten because of what happened with Ohio State's previous week. And huge for Penn State, I think, because in retrospect, when all is said and done, we're going to look at that game and think, wow, Auburn's pretty darn good and Penn State's really good. It was a well-played game. I know the officials, kind of had their say, but both of those teams are really solid football teams. And for Penn State to go out there and find a way to get it done against a really good defense, that says an awful lot about that Sean Clifford, James Franklin, that entire program. So it was enormous. It solidified Penn State in my mind as the best team in the Big Ten right this very second. And I just don't see any signs of them slowing down, barring injury, because a lot of those guys have played a ton of football, and they're not going to be intimidated or surprised by anything that they see. So it was definitely enormous for Penn State. And for the Big Ten, they now sort of have, that quality win to sort of hang out there no matter who's in contention for the playoff, because, obviously Ohio State was the favorite and maybe still is the favorite in the minds of some people. But, Penn State can now say, hey, look, we went and beat an SEC team. and covered the spread and did it against a defense that's really darn solid. So it's huge for both parties. There's no doubt.
It's not the first time ever that teams that are not a part of the autonomy or Power 5 have beaten teams in the Power 5, but we've seen it flare up. Obviously, with Fresno State or others, there's been these games that's happening. You know, like, for example, Memphis beats an SEC team in Mississippi State. Yeah, they're a mid-level or bottom level, but we're seeing that. You think this is there anything to these teams knowing, one, they're not bad, but also there's a little bit of a turf war with the group of 5 or below, that they're kind of like fighting for their I guess, future?
Yeah, I think there's an element to that for sure, because when this age of realignment, A, they're trying to fight for their future, make themselves look attractive for whoever, whoever comes calling. But then B, if they get left behind, they're going to be pretty bitter about it. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, there's definitely that aspect to it. And then I just think there's also sort of the talent gap has condensed. I think across the board, because you have super seniors who have stuck around. You've had players transferring to try to find playing time. You're going to see more of that with the immediate eligibility rule. So yeah, I think that there's talented players at the group of 5 level that in some cases chose to go there initially, or in other cases like Jake Haener at Fresno State, chose to go after losing a quarterback battle, one that in retrospect he probably should have won if you're Washington, if you're Jimmy Lake. I think it's all of that combined, and we're going to see more of it because roster management's going to be so hard to manage for coaches because of the free year of eligibility and all the other stuff that's been going on.
Barrett, again, Salih with us, CBS Sports, Sikkim 365 Radio. The Big 12, Oklahoma's the highest-rated team. They've had some of their warts, and in fact, Nebraska stayed pretty close with them, and we know Nebraska has been down, but that was kind of a game in which it looked like they played better, although they have their own issues. That's a completely different story. Iowa State had the early loss to Iowa. There's another nice win for the Big 10. Who is the Big 12 in your opinion right now?
Flawed and on shaky ground, because name me a power in the Big 12 right now. I mean, the only answer you could give is Oklahoma, but I would argue right now that Oklahoma looks far from it, especially when their calling card has been their offense, and it looks shaky to a point where people are clamoring for Caleb right now in Norman, and their defense has just sort of been okay by Oklahoma standards, which is not a compliment at all. So, yeah, there are so many different things fighting going against Oklahoma right now, and you can't really go with Iowa State. Obviously, they have that loss. Who else is out there that is even remotely competitive right now on a national level? There's not. So it is a conference right now that sort of lacks its perceived identity, and it needs something to happen, preferably with Oklahoma, but with somebody to at least show that it has an elite level team. And right now there's really not one.
What about what has happened with the landscape of college football ever since the Texas and Oklahoma story popped? The Big 12 has been able to at least add something. Of course, they may be wanting to add more. The overall landscape of college football, what is the end run, do you think, Barrett?
Oh, man, that is such a good question. To me, I still feel like the 16-team super conference thing is going to happen. It's just going to be so difficult and so bizarre, the route that we take to get there. I feel like the Pac-12, because they said they're not going to expand, is missing an opportunity to go get BYU, to go get Boise State. Right? Like, BYU's obviously not attainable. Boise State, from what our Dennis Dodd has said, might be the next in line in the Big 12. So it's such a dysfunctional sport, but it's in some way, eventually we're going to get to 16-team super conferences. And honestly, I think the sort of crux of that, sort of the catalyst, so to speak, would be what Notre Dame decides to do. Mm-hmm. Because its NBC contract is not that much compared to what every other school is bringing in. Now, the PR and the visibility is huge, but in reality, they're not making a ton of money. And if the SEC starts inking $80 million contracts after it takes in Texas and Oklahoma, then Notre Dame's going to look around and say, okay, what can we add to the ACC, and how much value will we provide? And so once that happens, which I think it will at some point, because it is all about money, and at some point you do have to swallow your pride with your independence, even if you do cherish it, which I think is fine. Notre Dame makes a decision, and then sort of every domino falls from there.
All right, I want to tell everybody, you and I, we were talking about having you on, and you coach your son's Little League team, which is phenomenal. Your daughter, you take her to gymnastics, phenomenal. You're enjoying that life as a father, and I told you in a text, don't ever stop, right? Always keep your priorities. I know you have a lot to do professionally, but that's awesome. How much fun is it to coach your son in Little League?
Oh, it's a lot of fun, but it is stressful. I mean, he's 10. And, like, he's not, like, the best player on the team, but he's not the worst, and he's, like, a real try-hard, right? And so, like, he needs a lot of coaching, but as you know, as a parent, like, the parent can't coach. Like, the other coaches have to do that because the kids deal with dad all the time. So I have to relegate him to some other coaches sometimes, but it's stressful. I mean, honestly, like, it's more stressful and more fulfilling than anything I did with my athletic career because, man, when he gets a walk-off hit or makes a good play, I'm more excited than I ever was when I was playing.
Yeah, it is a great moment. It's a thrill. I'll never forget Craig, who does a show with me, hit a home run one time. I mean, it was like the most flawless swing, massive. I mean, it's like you just don't ever lose those moments. You just really don't. Barrett, thanks for your time. I know you're busy. Barrett Sallee from CBS Sports on college football, Sikkim 365 Radio.